This podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace therapeutic services of any kind. Please refer to the list of references provided if you need support.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Sessions with Sara Cate and Ashley. I'm Ashley.
I'm Sara Cate.
Today is gonna be awesome. Today, Sara Cate is going to introduce us to the world of somatics. And this is super important because we're going to be talking about somatics a lot. And so understanding the vocabulary is something that we really want to make sure that you guys have. This is an awesome episode to come back and listen to as like if you are diving into something, because right now it might be super beneficial, but then in 3 months or whatever, you're like, wait, I feel like I could use better language with this, with what's going on. And so you can come back and listen. So our goal is to make it digestible and just super helpful. And then next week, so again, this week, lots of vocabulary type stuff. But then next week, we'll talk about next episode, we'll talk about how we apply some of these things, how we work through some of these things, how we like handle sensations as an example.
Perfect.
Does that sound good?
Sounds great to me.
Okay.
Sorry, my dog is also making an appearance.
Cedar's son is here.
I don't know what she needs, but can you just go hang? Can you go lay in the yard again? Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna
diving in.
We're gonna get started.
Back up. Just go backwards. Thank you. Okay. So, to begin, we're going to talk a lot, like Ashley was saying, this is going to be a lot of vocabulary. This is going to be a lot of conversations about the words, the language, the concepts of working with the body. And I think that begins with me throwing around the word somatic as if everyone's had an orientation to it. Maybe if you found this podcast, you do understand what somatics is and you have more of an interest in it. Perhaps you work in the field of somatic healing or somatic therapy. Soma in its purest definition is anything pertaining to the body. So anything to do in relationship to the actual physical body, separate from the soul, mind, or psyche. So yes, somatic work and psychology go hand in hand. Somatic work and emotional work go hand in hand, but they are in fact separate. It's a different entity. We're talking about sensation in the body. And the first distinction I think it's important for me to make is that this isn't about, in this episode specifically too, about healing anything, about changing your sensations. This is literally just to start a conversation with your body in a different way, to start to pay attention, to get curious. A word we throw around a lot in the somatic community is curiosity, because it helps us not get too entangled, because sensation comes, it goes. Sometimes it has a direct root and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's maybe something historical or very old within your body that's showing up because maybe you're doing trauma healing work. Maybe you're in the process of starting to kind of take control over your own healing, your own wellness journey. And so oftentimes some sensations will start to show up. And why I'm so passionate about this is because the body really does drive the brain. So I like to use the example with all my clients. You stub your toe and you immediately feel a wave of pain. And then in my case, a bunch of expletives come out of my mouth. And then my brain goes, you stubbed your toe again. I make the story after I've felt the pain and realize what's happened to my body. Same thing. I think we've all been in situations where we're uncomfortable and the hair rises up on the back of our neck. That's another one where we're like, oh my God, what's going on? Right. Yeah. And then our brain says, hey, threat, let's look around. Let's figure out what's happening because something's not okay here. That first was felt in your body. That first showed up as a sensation in your body. And then your brain makes the story. And so when you're thinking about any sort of wellness journey, not having a conversation about the body, not having a conversation about how we're feeling things and noticing things in our physical beings, it really is it's a huge miss. And I think, unfortunately, somatics are still really new in the psychological community, where we're still kind of considered more fringe. But truly, almost every single client that finds me says, you know, I've done, and there's a place for CBT, there's a place for DBT, all these other cognitive therapies. Yes, 100% talk therapy, there is benefit to it. I am not discrediting that. I do that. That's a part of my practice. And people say, I've done it. I know I have an awareness around what's going on. I know what my triggers are. I know, but I don't feel any different.
Okay.
And that's why this is important.
So this is so interesting because when you this is another way to say that we are just going back to our innate space. I don't know that we're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Because because when you are a baby, you feel discomfort before you cry. You feel hunger before you let your parents know with crying. Oftentimes there's it's not just crying that babies communicate with, right? But we come out knowing this. And it's another way that the current world and society sets us up to turn away from ourselves, right? And, great. This is great, Sara Cate.
Because literally, yeah. I loved that moment. It was like a really beautiful sigh.
Yeah,
that just came out.
Yeah, because it's like, this is, again, I have a hard time sometimes when stuff like this is considered fringe. I really do. And sometimes I have a really hard time because I don't know how many times people have said, oh, well, you just don't believe in this other stuff. Or like, they think that we like don't believe in talk therapy or something like that, which is,
it's not true.
Wild and completely just untrue. But it's like, but if you're not aware of this, what are we even doing?
Yeah.
Like, what is even happening if we're trying so hard to quote, be well, but turn away from our body? It makes zero sense to me. That's like what I don't get.
Well, I think honestly, it's because sensation is so subjective.
Yeah.
Which we are driven by data. We're driven by statistics. We're driven by numbers. We're driven by, these change markers that are so objective and concrete
and like eye-catching,
right? And like what we feel is so subjective to who we are. It's so intimate to who we are because of what we've lived. And so like my anxiety, we talked about this a while ago, my anxiety is going to show up different than your anxiety and her anxiety and their anxiety. So like it's a very fluid world. Our emotions and our sensations are a very fluid world, and they're not easy to pin down, and they're not easy to structure or organize. And so I think that's why people want to shy away from it, because there's not a hard science to it.
Right.
We're starting to get there, right? Like I can list off a number of people right now, a number of books that are really putting out some good work around somatic work and somatic healing, and like methods like trauma sensitive yoga that I've talked about with the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in Boston. They're doing some really awesome research to show like this has scientific evidence to show. But to Ashley's point, I mean, this takes us back to very primal ways.
It's so wild that we even need scientific information to prove it, because it's like we're human beings.
We feel it.
Yeah.
Like we know it. Like we cry when we're upset, typically. And then like what that teaches us, where this gets broken, is we have the original attunement, which is, or the original intent, which is I'm uncomfortable. We want our caregiver to have a healthy attunement to that. They come and they feed us. They come and they change us. They come and they take care of us. The problem is so much of us didn't have that. We didn't have the attuned caregiver, or the caregiver who was doing the best that they could, but maybe they just didn't have the ability to really honor our needs. And so that part of us was altered.
Yeah.
And so then we stopped listening because it was too painful to have those needs and have them not be met.
Right.
So we shut down this somatic world and say, nah, don't need the sensation, too painful. And then we are a bunch of adults are out here running around like not knowing what we feel, not knowing what we need, because this happened to us so young that we just shut this down. And so I want to be clear that this can be some difficult work, and it can be triggering. And so
Yeah.
again, this session, or this session specifically, is really focused on education. If you get triggered, if something comes up for you, seek your resources. We have a whole host of resources listed as well, because this isn't supposed to be a conversation about, let's go into the deepest, darkest sensation
Totally.
and try to change it. This is more like, let's start to explore,
Yeah.
but to give you the language to do
Yeah.
so.
So when you talk about sensation, I think a lot of people might grasp surface level what you mean when you say sensation.
Sure.
But how does somebody know the difference between a sensation or a feeling
Great.
or emotion?
Yes.
Or,
This is super. Yes. Thank you.
Help.
SOS. What is it? So yes, this is a really important differentiation to make, though. And I like to use actual definitions around these things, because I think it will happen. And let me backtrack really quickly to say, all of the forms that all of these definitions and constructs and categories that we'll talk about, will have forms for them listed in the show notes. So you will be able to access these forms to help kind of fill in these definitions and have a tangible kind of handout, if you will, to utilize for yourself. So if you're just listening to this and you're hanging out, driving, whatever, there is a reference sheet that you can get a hold of. So first and foremost, I would like to start with an emotion. The definition of emotion: it's a natural instinctive state of mind, keyword, natural instinctive state of mind deriving from one's circumstances, mood, or relationships with others. So right there, the definitive kind of marker in that is, this is a state of mind. This emotion is a state of my mind based off of, based off of what the world around me is telling me.
Okay.
This is how my emotions are formed. I see that you're upset. Maybe I get upset. I see that you're doing something hurtful. It triggers me and I'm upset, right? Like, it's all almost like based off of what my brain is telling me is happening in the world around me.
Okay.
Now, a feeling is an emotional state or reaction. So like, I feel joy when I see Ashley's face, right? So like,
don't we all know?
I
definitely not.
That's not true. We all do. I feel joy. So like, the emotion is joy. The feeling is that I'm feeling it. And then to drop it deeper, it's now, what is that actual sensation in my body? So how does the emotion of joy, how is it felt in my body through sensation?
So a further description.
More
specific.
Way more specific and way more illusory, way more subjective, way more, sometimes it's like you can't get your hand around it or your mind around it, because it is, we aren't given language to describe how we feel. We aren't even given really healthy emotional language when we're in development.
Yeah.
Let alone like
average is
feeling it.
We're top 5.
We're taught 5. Thank you. I remember hearing that too. Like, we're taught an average of 5 fucking emotions. Oops. And I'm passionate about it. And then we're not even having a conversation about how that shows up in our body, how we feel it. So the neat thing about sensation and somatic work is we start to, here's the definition. Oh, let me back up. A physical feeling or perception resulting from something that happens to or comes into contact with the body. That's sensation. So we're going to use these words, and I thought it was important. Sorry for the noise. We're going to use these words, and I thought it was important to have really clear, distinctive definitions that surround it, so people, so you can grab onto something and say, okay, an emotion is different than a sensation. So when I'm angry, there is a sensation that goes along with that. And how is that felt in my body?
And could you say that it's not like either or, it's and?
It's and. 100% it's and. It will always, you will always feel something. Typically, unless, again, like our last episode, we talked about the dissociation, then it's harder to gauge and it's harder to track your body when you are dissociated. And again, not a negative thing, just a part of our brain's process to keep us safe, because oftentimes our sensations have not been safe because they have gone unmet, unsupported, unacknowledged. And so we learn to leave our bodies early because of that. And so now this conversation is saying, hey, we're going to start to notice. So go lightly into the night here. Because it's a lot. So a couple other things I just want to roll through really quickly. The word tracking, you'll hear me use tracking a lot. Tracking is just kind of noticing what is happening in your body. It is the ability to pinpoint, engage, and assess what sensations are coming up. So I'll say something a lot to clients where I'll be like, can you track that emotion? Or can you where are you feeling that? Right. And that is essentially your ability to notice and pinpoint where something's happening and what's actually happening.
So I just want to like bring up, if you are somebody who suffers from something like anxiety, right? You've often already done some of this tracking, because when your anxiety comes up, like for me, I know immediately it comes up like in my diaphragm area. And so you probably have already recognized this and like started this process. It's just maybe you didn't realize that's what you were doing, because you could innately like feel like, oh, I feel this here, I feel this there.
My
right?
palms
But
are sweaty. I can notice this.
Yeah.
My heart's racing. I can notice that.
And but maybe you're not. But hopefully this helps kind of again like put the language around like, oh, what's actually happening, and how cool it is that if we then use that to guide our next steps, it can be really beneficial information.
Oh, totally. It helps us completely reorganize. Like if we start to feel something bubbling up, or if something's like actively happening for us in our sensory world, we're like, hold on, I need to reorganize this. I need to get out of here. I need to go take care of myself. I need to find a friend, find a support, whatever it might be. It really helps us more efficiently, I do believe, organize our world. Now, again, the reentry has to be safe. The reorganization back to our bodies has to be safe for these things not to be too overwhelming, right? Because if we've shut down sensation historically, then the reality of us trying to feel it is going to be a little bit too much. Like we need to go in small doses, like very, very gently and very, very lightly. Like we say this in somatic work a lot too, we have to titrate it.
Yeah.
Like you did with science experiments as a kid. So, or as an adult, maybe you're a scientist.
That would be cool.
It would be cool. I know a scientist. Not to like, she's a badass. I just want to say that because like I can remember when she got her master's in something really scientific, and so we were like, we're friends with the scientist.
Yeah.
Anyways, side note. So it makes me feel like I'm smarter by proximity.
Right. Totally.
That's how it works, right?
Okay. So if somebody comes to you and you're brand new, right? Brand new. I'm walking in fresh. I got no idea. Maybe I've had some talk therapy in the past, but I have no idea. What would you say, or like, what would be some of like the first things that you would say to me to introduce this topic? Not getting me to feel into my body, but like, how would you say, like, how would you kind of show me the progression of that session of the introduction of it? Yeah,
that's great. That's going to keep me on track, Ashley. Great question. So first I do help somebody define sensory categories, because I think oftentimes we need the words and the language that we have used, which is very structured, very organized, very literal. We need those to help us create the inner world of sensation. So it gives us, again, language, but an articulation. We can articulate it, right? Because we start to develop this vocabulary. So this is the work that I've done in workshops and led. So this is from my own perception. This is from me gathering from all of the different theoretical orientations that I've studied from, and the work that I've done with clients. So this is kind of a coming together of my experience and what I've seen enough. And this is how this is the framework I've created to help my clients. So there are, I've 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes. And so what I essentially say is we start to just notice where the location of the sensation is kind of our first gateway into noticing. So like Ashley said, I notice it in my diaphragm. That's how my anxiety shows up. Even locating something, it's an incredible step. It's an incredible ability. It takes a lot of capacity to figure out, oh shit, yep, that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling anxiety in my stomach. Because then all of a sudden the story comes in, our sweet little brains go into narrative mode and they're like, oh, well, you are having anxiety. Why are you having anxiety? What's happening? What's happening right now? What aren't you doing? What should you be doing? Right? We go down this rabbit hole. And so what this work tries to do is to say, okay, I'm going to slow that entire process down of going into the rabbit hole of why and just sit with what.
Mm-hmm. So it's, I think, an important thing to like point out is because, like she said, the goal, especially of this session, one, not what we're going to get into on this podcast, and we're not like diving into deep trauma,
No.
right? But how this process is gentle and non-threatening, right? Because it's not about, like she just said, it's about like, we're just locating it to start, or maybe that's where we start, wherever the input first comes, or whatever category it first comes into. But then your body kind of gets to decide what category comes in next, right? And so it's not like you are going to go sit down in one of these sessions. And I have had sessions with Sara Cate, and so I can speak to this from like a personal experience. She's not like, here's the 7 categories, fill this box out, or you're not leaving.
That is not the way I work.
Right? So, but my body guides, my state where I'm at guides, and there might be certain situations where maybe I'm able to fill in 7 of these boxes. And maybe sometimes it's 1, and maybe sometimes it's 1 for 7 weeks, but it's not.
And that's enough.
Right. But it's not a rush process, and it's perfect just as it is, because the information that your body is giving you is perfect, right? You don't have to like try to switch it. You just have to hear it.
Yes. Yeah. And pay attention. Like all we're trying to do is, again, pay attention. We're just trying to create a presence where presence never was, or presence hasn't been. And so first one is location. So that's just identifying where in your body you are noticing the sensation. And then perhaps I would work somebody into, dependent upon where we were at in the process of like, and how much space does that take up, or how big is it? If they give me like it's like a basketball. Okay. So I'd say, okay, so then you're noticing maybe it's a little bit round, or it's a sphere, right? Like then you're noticing a shape along with that. So then you'd say, okay, so it's in your stomach. It's about the size of a basketball. So it's very round. What else can you tell me about it? Right. If there's room to continue to move through, we could do something like, well, it feels really soft. Like it's not hard. Right. So then all of a sudden now we have a texture. I have clients describe everything from sandpaper for a sensation to like gel or something slippery. Or I'm trying to think of something really interesting I've had. I don't remember, dropping marbles in a jar. Like, right. So there are glass rounds that are dropping. So there's a movement. So they're going, and so that's another one, a movement or action. So they're dropping down into something that's empty. Right. And so that even right there is a huge descriptive way to start to create context around whatever this is. And so finally, like, for instance, the one where it was marbles dropping into a jar, it was like, essentially hard emotions that fall into the abyss. Like they drop into the jar, but they're never supported. They never really get to feel them. And so for them, it wasn't like one specific emotion. It was just these like, it was like any of my hard, difficult emotions just drop into this empty space. Right. And like how informative that is. So then we got to talk about like, well, what do we get to do what do you get to do to help build a container that feels supportive to help? And then we
Yeah.
would talk about what a supportive container would feel like, right? So then it was placing a blanket at the bottom of the jar and what it would be like for a very soft blanket to catch these, spherical glass marbles. So just very, very different than obviously what you do in talk therapy, and not. Because what we're doing is we're having a conversation about how this person's emotional world has never felt supported. It's never felt safe. It's never felt like it has a support system underneath it. But we're looking at how it shows up and manifests in their actual body.
Yeah.
And then when we start to say, okay, and then how would we support it? Then that changes that gets to start to change our nervous system to be like, oh my God, it would feel different.
Yeah.
I would feel something different in my body.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the categories again were location, size, shape, texture, movement, action, weight. Oh yeah, if there's a density to it, if it feels heavy, it feels light, transparent, that kind of stuff. And then also color. I work a ton with color. Sometimes color is the first most easily identifiable thing for people. It's like it's orange and it's in my throat, or it's black and it's near my sacrum. Like
yeah, that's kind of crazy because when people will be working with their pelvis, their pelvic floor, and people will say like, I don't know why, but I'm seeing red. Or like, I don't know why, but like I keep seeing this. Or sometimes I will get the sensation that there's some kind of color and I'll say like, you see something orange? And they'll be like, whoa, how did you know? Right. But it's kind of wild when we give the permission. Maybe it's giving ourselves permission, but I think for me, sometimes I really need someone like Sara Cate to give me the permission to go there, to be open to that curiosity, to be open to the possibility that like me saying I feel something or see something, or it looks like this, or it looks like, I feel like I told you one time it felt like a really big stick was stuck in my hip. To be able to say that and not have somebody be like, well, you're fucking weird. Like, so back to the problem though, right? Like that's what happens, or that's what can happen. But it's like, no, okay, let's explore that, because that's telling you something. There's a very real reason why the certain sensations come up, why the certain visions come up, why it's a certain color, why it's a certain texture. Like she just described something being hard and having that free fall into something that's not supportive, versus even if there is a free fall, being caught, how different that is.
Yeah. Like even just like my nervous system thinking about something soft supporting my emotional world or my emotional experience is like, I can feel that it's almost like my collarbones kind of settle down onto my body, and I can just feel a softness kind of in the back of my neck. Like it literally helps my tension settle, because it's like, oh, the thought of even anybody finding this podcast and hearing that and having their emotional world feels a little bit more supportive is so regulating to my nervous system. It's so supportive to my nervous system, because it means that we're not going to have that emptiness that so many of us have, and it drives so much of the difficulties that show up in our lives.
Yes. Well,
so this is a lot of information. Remember, you're going to have the forms. So I just want to again, kind of go to just solidify a little bit of the conversation here around the difference between emotion, feeling, sensation. So something that I'm going to have Ashley actually pick. I've broken some emotions down into a category called sensory concepts. And the reason I called it a sensory concept is because oftentimes if we label an emotion, we are not going to feel what's attached to it. So my sensory concept description is a play on emotion. So I could say, what's the emotion? And Ashley could say grief. So rather than just kind of categorizing it as an emotion, because again, emotion is a concept of the mind, to be able to bring it into a little bit more of a wider conversation around and the sensory experience or concept that you're feeling is grief. So then what would show up for you in your body? So I'm gonna let Ashley pick one of these because I don't want to pick a hard one.
Yeah.
There's
I
a
feel like
whole
you
bunch
should
on this
know
list.
Which one I'll pick? Go back up.
I know. Which one do you want to do?
Well, love.
Okay,
obviously.
yeah.
It's my
She's
favorite.
feeling love these days.
But
Shout out to
love
Nana.
is love is my favorite.
Okay. So how, Ashley,
Yep.
do you, with these categories, these sensory
Mhm.
categories, what can you give me about what you notice about love in your body?
Okay. In my chest,
Mm-hmm.
it's big.
Mm-hmm.
It's light.
How big?
Takes up my whole chest.
So it doesn't go beyond the outline of your body, but it takes up your whole chest. Or can it spread a little further?
So it can spread if I sit with it.
Okay.
Initial responses is like it's here, but it's not
Okay.
like it. How do I describe this? It's like as soon as you tell me to what does love feel like,
Mhm.
it's immediately like my entire like chest area. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't have to expand within me. If I sit and like allow myself to be in it, expansion, yes.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't say that I have ever found that there's like a wall,
Mhm.
70 feet out there.
That
it
you
can
haven't found
expand.
you haven't found the
Yeah.
edge.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I don't know, it's kind of I can't really say that it's a color,
Okay.
but it's just like little particles that just like expand everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Little particles.
Yeah.
So it's
Really light.
Really light. Okay.
Yeah.
Do the little particles that expand, do they have any movement?
Yeah, they have movement, not crazy. It's not like chaos, right?
Like
But
glittery?
they just, yes.
Almost. Yeah.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
glittery.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And something I think to point out too is that you said when I sit with it. And so one thing that I do want to be clear about is when we're sitting with things that are comfortable to us, it's easy to normally it's a little bit more easy to sit with them when they're comfortable, when it's a comfortable feeling.
Totally.
I don't encourage, if something is really uncomfortable for you, even if it's love, because love could be very uncomfortable.
Totally.
Joy could be very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be, anxiety or anger or fear, but if it's uncomfortable for you to sit with, right? If a certain amount of discomfort comes in, you back out.
Which is why I chose love.
The permission to
because I knew I was okay.
The permission to like take space and be like,
Yeah.
yep, that was good. I did it. I touched in, I noticed it, and I'm out.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but
Yes.
Ashley, because love is a very resourced, because love is actually a resourced emotion for her, something that feels comfortable in her body, she can take a little bit more time with it. She can linger with it. She can allow it to kind of move as it feels okay to her to do. But I think that's a really awesome kind of note to make there. Just be mindful
totally.
about things that bring up some discomfort in your body. We do not have to sit in it. That is not the point. I do not have my clients come here and say, great, grief, we're going to sit here all session. Like that's not how it's, and we'll talk more about how we work with it later in the next session. But for the purposes of this, and just noticing it, right? Being an explorer of your own internal world where there's no statement behind it. Be as objective as you can about what it is. I noticed these little particles, like they're very glittery. It's in my chest. It can expand, but I notice it here first. It's light, period. There's no, and that's good or that's bad. You will not hear me best I can. I try. Sometimes it still comes in because my conditioning, but you will not hear me say good or bad, because good inherently says this is what you want, and bad inherently says avoid. And so I will use comfortable and uncomfortable as best I can to describe these things, because it is important for me and my clients to stop shaming these perceived negative or hard or bad emotions.
Right.
Because we're just not going to feel them if that happens ever.
Right.
So beautiful. Oh, I love that you picked love.
Well,
what a sweet, I kind of like that. That's
that's
where
that's the end.
we can kind of wrap it up.
Not the end.
not
just the
the
end.
end.
Of this
It's over.
session.
No more.
Just the
Um,
end of this session.
No, we're not doing that. But yeah, so
Okay, so next week.
yes,
Or
next week.
next session.
Yeah,
next
we don't know when
session.
it's gonna go.
Yeah, next session. We're gonna talk more about like, okay, how to work with these. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're going. So again, this episode, it's a resource. You have these handouts. They're in the show notes. It's a resource. Okay, so use the resource. Come back to it when you need, leave it when you need to. It's here. It's not going to go away. And yeah, and next time we're just going to talk about how we would use them. And where to go from here.
Yeah, what we would do, what we would notice. Sorry, my dog is again in the session. Can you sit? Thank you. What we would do, what we would notice, and then if we have the capacity, again, if it is available, to start to kind of pay attention to what it does once we pay attention to it.
Yeah.
To notice what happens next. And then if ultimately, like I was saying, we get to a point with that one client where we were dropping the marbles into a bottomless jar, and then we started noticing, oh, well, what would it feel like to put the blanket there? And then it was like, oh, wow, I can sense something catching these emotions. And like, we were able to like work through what it felt like in their body to have sadness supported.
Yeah.
Right. Once we could figure out what sadness felt like in their body. So like, we get to kind of start to adjust those things. Now, obviously this is a podcast, so we're not working through those things in real time with real clients. This is just us giving the information. But Ashley and I do a lot of visualization work. We do a lot of exploratory work in our inner worlds. And so this is the language, again, I have just pulled from the work that I've done, the education that I've done, and the experiences that I've had with so many clients around this. And Ashley will pull from the same and some of our own personal stuff next time too, around how things show up for us. But this kind of hopefully gave you a useful little guide to beginning to explore and, you know, trying to remain curious as best you can for these things, because this might be old stuff for some of you, and this might be some very, very new information. But wherever it finds you, I hope that there's support and some new awarenesses to come.
Okay. See you next time.
See you next time.